You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the continent to bring you the truth about cannabis and marijuana law reform.
I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
The Russ Belville Show. The voice of the marijuana nation.
It's like marijuana ought to be legalized. Good people smoke marijuana.
Now, here's your host, Radical Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-token lovers of liberty. It is Friday, March 3rd, 2017, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. It's episode number 900, and coming up on today's show, it's my second episode 900 in my lifetime. So we're going to have a retro spectacular look back at over a decade of Radical Russ on the radio. In our Cannabis Focus, we'll take a look at the miniseries When We Rise and learn some lessons for marijuana activists from LGBT history. And in our drug war data mining, we'll give you a guide to the Federal Cannabis Caucus and federal legislation regarding marijuana. Then in hour 2, my drug war segment from the 2006 Search for the Next Great Progressive Talk Radio Star National Contest that started all of this talking. But first, let's get to the Cannabis Headline News.
Covering the latest headlines in consumer cannabis, medical marijuana, and industrial hemp. Now your marijuana headlines in 4 minutes and 20 seconds. This is Cannabis News.
This is your Cannabis Headline News for Friday, March 3rd, 2017. When it comes to marijuana, medical is good, recreational is bad, according to White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer. If adopted, the distinction between medical and recreational cannabis, which Spicer made last week, could become a headache for regulators and a killer for businesses. Criminalizing the recreational market, legal in 8 states and Washington, D.C., would mean the loss of about $33 billion over the next 5 years, the Bloomberg Intelligence Global Cannabis Index responds by dropping 9.8% between Spicer's February 23rd comments and the close of trading Thursday. President Donald Trump separated medical from recreational marijuana during his campaign. He said he was 100% in favor of the former while calling the latter a bad experiment. Regardless, he said it should be decided by the states. A federal prosecutor has snuffed out plans by pot fans to celebrate Nevada's new recreational marijuana law by lighting up on an Indian reservation near Las Vegas. U.S. Attorney Daniel Bogdan took a hard line in a letter to organizers of a cannabis festival this weekend, saying federal law applies and pot smokers could be prosecuted. Bogdan's warning raised concerns about a possible Trump administration crackdown on marijuana. He says a 2013 Obama administration directive that was seen as relaxing enforcement on tribal lands in states where pot is legal might have been misinterpreted. He says pot is still illegal in Indian country and on federal land. Organizers of the High Times Cannabis Cup Festival say there will still be music, t-shirts, and souvenirs at the event at a Moapa Band of Paiutes festival site, but spokesman Joe Bresney says it'll essentially be just a concert this year. Oregon lawmakers, worried about a nationwide crackdown on legal marijuana under President Donald Trump's administration, are rushing to protect the personal information of pot customers in case federal agents try to seize it. A bipartisan group of lawmakers is taking one of the first direct state actions in response to White House spokesman Sean Spicer last week, suggesting a boost in enforcement of federal anti-marijuana laws. The committee that crafts Oregon's pot policies has proposed legislation that requires marijuana businesses to destroy customers' personal information such as names, addresses, and birth dates gathered for marketing purposes within 48 hours. The measure is scheduled for its first hearing Tuesday. It must pass the full legislature and be signed by the Democratic governor, who's vowed to fight federal interference in Oregon's pot market. The 2016 Toxic Trends Report, released Thursday by Washington State's Poison Control Center, shows marijuana-related incidents are up across the state. Last year, there were 286 emergency calls to the center related to pot. That's up from 265 in 2015. Last year, 20 to 29-year-olds called with the most marijuana-related injuries. But Dr. Alexander Gerard, the clinical managing director at the Washington Poison Center, said, quote, "Where we see the most serious clinical effects are with the hash oil products and with the concentrates," end quote. Since last year, 50 of those emergency calls involved children under 5 years old. Interceptions of marijuana sent through the mail showed an 18.4% increase last year after 2 years of declines that appeared to dash expectations of doom among pot legalization opponents. Non-marijuana drug mail, by contrast, increased 11.6% last year. The figures include packages that originate overseas, and the U.S. Postal Inspection Service hasn't tracked statistics on states of origin. But the average weight of pot mail continued a long-running drop since at least fiscal 2012, which ended just before voters in Colorado and Washington passed legal pot initiatives. The average pot package weighed a hair under 4 pounds last year, down from 5.5 pounds in fiscal 2012. German authorities say they expect to have a cannabis growing program up and running in 2019 after the country approved legislation allowing some patients to get the drug as a prescription medication. Germany's Federal Institute for Drugs and Medical Devices said Friday that it's setting up a cannabis agency to oversee the growing program. It plans to solicit bids from throughout the European Union to find companies to run it. The program's first cannabis is expected to be available in 2019. Until then, prescriptions will be filled with imported marijuana. This has been your Cannabis Headline News for Friday, March 3rd, 2017. I'm Russ Belville.
In the interest of fair and balanced journalism, the Russ Belville Show presents the anti-drug public service announcement of the day.
So you used to be taller. What happened?
What happened? Pressure. The pressure to be so cool and so popular and to never say the wrong thing to anyone, so I'm cool with everyone. The pressure to drink and get high. Pressure happened.
So now what?
I don't know, but this isn't working.
This has been the Russ Belville Show's anti-drug public service announcement of the day, exclusively on RadicalRuss.com.
You know Herb Thrasher from the Herb Thrasher Flower Hour. Now get ready for Herb Age Designs for the proud cannabis consumer. Herb Age Designs, lifestyle gear for the 420 friendly. Herb Age Designs, we've got Frisbee golf discs and durable hemp gear. Herb Age Designs, we've got shot glasses, drinking glasses, coffee mugs, and beer cozies. Check us out on Facebook and online at herbagedesigns.com. And follow Herb Age and Herb Thrasher on Twitter.
You're not high. You're listening to the Russ Belville Show.
THC levels in marijuana snacks are so high they could kill children and pets.
Okay, maybe you're high too.
At midnight, July 1st, 2015, adult marijuana prohibition came to an end in Oregon. Immediately, over 400,000 adults who consume cannabis responsibly were no longer criminals. This is what freedom sounds like. Brought to you by Portland Normal.
The world of cannabis is evolving at a frenetic pace. The Russ Belville Show gets behind the headlines to take a deeper look at breaking news in our Cannabis Focus.
This week, ABC has broadcast a miniseries entitled When We Rise, and it is an epic retelling of the gay rights movement from the era of the Stonewall riots to the Supreme Court's decision affirming marriage equality in the Obergefell case. The series follows the lives of Cleve Jones, Ken Jones, and Roma Guy gay and lesbian activists in San Francisco who were instrumental in their community activism. Cleave's work was with assassinated city supervisor Harvey Milk in San Francisco, and he was part of the creation of the AIDS quilt that's illustrated in the series, as well as Ken Jones' work organizing and testifying to bring together disparate gay groups in solidarity. Roma Guy's determination to create a safe space for women, both straight and gay, figures prominently as well. Now, while I'm straight, during the mid-2000s, as reactionary conservatives worked to put anti-gay initiatives on statewide ballots, I found myself reading, commenting on, and eventually writing for the front page of a prominent LGBT blog called Pam's House Blend. It was run by a Southern African-American lesbian, so my straight white Pacific Northwest viewpoints provided the voice of an interesting ally during politically difficult times. My writing for the Blend culminated in me securing a blogger credential for the 2008 Democratic National Convention in Denver when Senator Barack Obama was nominated for the presidency. Now, a few in the community were perturbed that the token straight white guy was getting that prized credential. Most appreciated my advocacy and the fact that somebody like me gets it. Although I don't know if I can ever truly get it when it comes to how LGBT people deal with the world, just like I can't imagine what it's like to be black, or what it's like to be a non-English speaking immigrant, or what it's like to be a Muslim woman wearing a hijab or hijab. But as a lifelong pot smoker, I feel like I have some tiny inkling of what it's like. Now, no, I'm not trying to say that being a pothead is exactly equivalent to being gay or any other persecuted minority. It's more like being minority light. It's a voluntary minority. And even the most desperately ill person who needs cannabis as medicine to live is choosing to use that cannabis. Most of us can stop using our cannabis, and most of us can usually hide our use. But within our status as a minority, slowly gaining acceptance in mainstream America, there are some parallels and lessons for us in the civil rights battles of other minorities. In When We Rise, they presented the difficulty of marshaling all the disparate groups in the gay community under one rainbow flag. As Roma struggles with understanding she's lesbian, she tries to build her women's building and finds conflict between some of the women who want it to be a safe space for all women against those who want it to be a lesbian-only enclave. In Cleave's case, as he's trying to build support for the candidacy of Harvey Milk for San Francisco City Supervisor, he finds it difficult to get the lesbians on board with the campaign. Rosie O'Donnell is in the film, and she plays Del Martin. And Del Martin was the pioneering activist who formed the first lesbian political organization. By the way, she was also the first person to marry, to have a lesbian marriage in San Francisco, before California voided that marriage 6 months later. Del, in the film, complains that the gay men lead such a flamboyant and risky lifestyle that's going to squelch mainstream support for their cause. There's a part in there where she even shrugs off the emerging AIDS epidemic with kind of a "what did you expect" attitude, and even an admonishment for the casual sex and rampant drug use in the gay male community. And later, as the gay rights movement becomes more politically active, Cleave finds himself in conflict with HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, which he finds to be too conservative and appeasing of the mainstream. And he finds himself in conflict with ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, which he finds to be too radical and confrontational. And then Ken Jones, the Vietnam veteran, he works to build coalitions within the gay community, but as he does so, white gays were shunning him, telling him to go back to the Tenderloin district where the black gays like him and the Latino gays were segregated. And then when Ken later testifies in Oakland in a scene before the all-black Oakland City Council, he's confronted by the homophobia in the African-American community and told no real black man is gay. So I watched these scenes and I saw parallels to our own community. The medical marijuana consumers who say they are patients, not criminals, as if a healthy pot smoker is a criminal. The hemp can save the planet people who don't want the party lifestyle of the pot people contaminating their non-drug industrial arguments. You got the marijuana is safer crowd that casts aspersions on the users of other not as safe drugs. You got the older flower power generation that's fearful of the crack torch bearing dabbers. We've got the tilters, the treat it like tomatoes people who become impatient with the pragmatic approach of the tax and regulate people, and so on. We have all these different factions. Now, in the gay rights movement, what finally brought together all these bickering groups with disparate agendas was two wars. The biological one against the human immunodeficiency virus, and the political one for legal, martial, and marital equality. And it took far too many deaths from AIDS and expulsions of gay soldiers and refusal of basic marriage rights, like visiting a sick spouse, sharing a spouse's insurance, planning their funeral, and so on, before this country finally began doing the right thing and started treating LGBT people with the same rights, privileges, responsibilities, and respect as every American deserves. So when I'm writing article after article about Jeff Sessions, warning as loudly and often as I can that a renewed war on recreational marijuana is imminent, it's only because I don't want our multiple disparate bickering groups to have to suffer greatly before we coalesce, to ignore our differences and focus on our shared condition. We all suffer discrimination, indignity, and lack of access because of the prohibition of a plant. I don't want to see the medical marijuana folks chill out because, well, they're safe and protected by the Rohrabacher spending rider and Spicer's comments ensuring that patients aren't in the crosshairs. I don't want the hemp people to chill out because, well, they became legal under the Farm Bill and a lot of these states are allowing them to grow hemp now. I don't want the adult consumers to chill out because, well, I can always grow my own and I don't really shop at the dispensaries that might be shut down anyway. At worst, it'll be just like Washington, D.C. Grow and Give. No big deal. And I don't want the underground growers to chill out because, hey, look, more prohibition. That means we're going to be selling weed at $300 an ounce again. In this metaphor, we adult use consumers are those flamboyant gay boys in the Tenderloin, the most difficult color in the rainbow flag to defend to the mainstream. If we remain separate and let Trump's administration focus solely on us as the justification to maintain prohibition, it's going to last longer than necessary. Only by banding together and insisting that no matter why we use this plant, none of us deserves to be treated as criminals. Only then can we hasten the fall of this 80-year abomination of cannabis prohibition. All use is none. And I've feared since the beginning of the medical marijuana movement, while it is a pragmatic and compassionate and effective movement, no doubt about it, it's also, in a sense, our 3/5 compromise, referring back to the infamous compromise that got the United States colonies to finally band together as one nation. The idea that black people would be counted as 3/5 of a person for representation in our Congress. This unholy, evil compromise we made to allow slavery to fester in our country for 100 years before we changed it. And the repercussions of that we still feel to this day. Now, it's not, again, a perfect analogy, but while medical marijuana did a whole lot of good and made a lot of progress for us, it also divided us into people who had a legitimate reason to use marijuana and people who did not have a legitimate reason. And now that division is coming back to bite us in the ass with these comments by Spicer and Sessions and Trump that there's a difference between medical and recreational marijuana. The difference is a moral judgment The difference is a culture war. There is no difference between medical and recreational marijuana when we talk about the actual product, the way it's grown, the people that produce it and process it and sell it, and the people who use it. The only difference being some of them might die without it. Some of them might be debilitated without it. But the difference to the rest of the community, the rest of the world around them, is no different.
What is your major malfunction, numbnuts?
I hope everybody takes this in the spirit in which it's meant. Sometimes I do a bad job of expressing that I want us to be together. And sometimes my anger at our division comes off as divisive, and I don't intend that. It's 20 after. Happy 420 to the Mountain Time Zone. We're back with some drug war data mining, a guide to our federal battles and our federal generals when we return.
The Russ Belville Show is proudly sponsored by the Marijuana Business Association. The MJBA, called by NBC News the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, is the fastest growing business association in the fastest growing industry in America. I've been working with the MJBA for years, and I personally invite you to join the MJBA. MJBA also publishes the popular MJ Headline News on Facebook and the MJNewsNetwork.com and Marijuana Channel 1 on YouTube. Visit mjba.net for more details.
You're not high. You're listening to the Russ Belville Show.
Well, when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal.
Okay. Maybe you're high, too.
Georgia. Hi, this is Willie Nelson. Alcohol prohibition didn't work in the 1920s, and marijuana prohibition isn't working today. It's time we stopped arresting responsible marijuana smokers. It's the fair thing to do.
For more information, contact NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Call toll-free 888-67-NORML or visit their website at norml.org.
Promoting the end of adult cannabis prohibition is easy because we have facts, science, reason, compassion, evidence, truth, and logic on our side. It's even easier when researchers catalog it all for us. Learn how to gather the facts on marijuana use, arrests, seizures, rehabs, drug tests, and more on this edition of Drug War Data Mining.
Today in the Data Mines, we're taking a look at the federal battles being fought in our Congress. And, of course, fighting those battles for us is the newly formed Congressional Cannabis Caucus. It's so great that we finally have an official recognition in the U.S. Congress. Now, currently, we only have 5 members of this Cannabis Caucus. The founding members, the 4 founders, from 4 states with legal marijuana. That would be my representative, Earl Blumenauer, the Democrat from Oregon, Jared Polis, a Democrat from Colorado, I've been pronouncing too many Spanish words lately. Dana Rohrabacher, the Republican from California, and Don Young, the Republican from Alaska. So the founders, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, showing the bipartisan nature of support for cannabis reform. There is a new member who has joined recently, and that would be Ed Perlmutter, Democrat from Colorado. So we have 2 Colorado Democrats on the Congressional Cannabis Caucus. I would like to see representatives from every one of the states that has medical or recreational marijuana legalization. That's 44 states we're talking about at some level where we get down to CBD laws. So we ought to have, shall I say it, a much bigger caucus. We ought to have more people involved in this organization. We should have Tennessee's Steve Cohen has long time been a supporter of reforming cannabis laws. I don't see his name here yet. I want to see, there's so many. Nobody from Washington State at this point. Nobody other than Dana Rohrabacher from California. There are 53 representatives from the state of California, you know. Maybe a few of those Bay Area reps could get involved in this. So if you could help by writing to those or calling or emailing those representatives, Earl Blumenauer, Ed Perlmutter, Jared Polis, Dana Rohrabacher, Don Young, let them know your support for the Congressional Cannabis Caucus and start emailing some of these other reps. Email your rep and ask them why they don't get involved. Ask them to please get involved in shaping cannabis policy, because this is where it's going to have to happen. And this is my now angel's advocate view. I'm trying to have a more sunny disposition and be more optimistic about these things as to how this could turn out good for us with Sessions and Trump. If they do ratchet up some sort of problem in the states that have legalized marijuana, now with 71% support among the people that it should be a states' rights issue, that could be the kick in the ass that the Congress needs to make the change. We've heard this from going back. President Obama said the same thing. President Clinton, President Bush have always said the same thing. Well, we could do something about this. It's really up to Congress, which is bull. We know they have the signatory power through the Controlled Substances Act to make a significant change. We know they have the power through executive orders to make significant change. But they've always punted this off to Congress. Well, this could be the time. This could be the moment where there's enough political support, enough awareness, and enough representatives from states that want to see that tax money coming in and those jobs continuing, that they do band together and pass things that would help us in the federal Congress. So the good news there is that Sean Spicer has indicated their recognition of Congress's will on medical through the Rohrabacher-Blumenauer amendment that prevents Department of Justice spending in the medical states. So there could be a similar passage. There is the McClintock-Polis amendment, and that is an amendment that the McClintock-Polis amendment is basically the rec version of the Rohrabacher amendment. So it would forbid the Department of Justice from spending money, from interfering in the states that have legalized adult use marijuana, the 8 states that have adult use. That could make it through. That only failed by like 18 votes last time it came across. Pick up 9 votes, that could soon be the law. But there are also some bills we can take a look at in the Congress. States Medical Marijuana Property Rights Act. This is H.R. 331, introduced by Representative Barbara Lee, Democrat from California. And this would amend the Controlled Substances Act so you wouldn't get civil forfeiture due to medical marijuana-related conduct. Basically, they couldn't seize your warehouse. They couldn't seize your store. They couldn't seize your cannabis if it was part of a legal medical marijuana program. There's the LUMA, L-U-M-M-A, the Legitimate Use of Medical Marijuana Act, H.R. 714. This is the one sponsored by Representative H. Morgan Griffith, a Republican of Virginia. And this would provide for the legitimate use of medical marijuana in accordance with the laws of the various states. There is H.R. 715, the Compassionate Access Act, also sponsored by Representative H. Morgan Griffith, Republican of Virginia, to provide for the rescheduling of marijuana, the medicinal use of marijuana in accordance with state law, and the exclusion of cannabidiol from the definition of marijuana and for other purposes. Basically a reschedule down to Schedule 2. And then the 2 big ones that we really want to see move forward. The Respect State Marijuana Laws Act of 2017, sponsored by Dana Rohrabacher of California, H.R. 975. This one would amend the Controlled Substances Act to provide for a new rule regarding the application of the act to marijuana. Basically, it would say federal law says marijuana is illegal, but if you got a state law that says it's legal for medical or adult use, we respect that. Federal government won't interfere. And finally, H.R. 1227, the Ending Federal Marijuana Prohibition Act of 2017. This is the one that is sponsored by Representative Thomas Garrett, Republican of Virginia. So let's hear it from the Virginia Republicans sponsoring these bills. H.R. 1227, to limit the application of federal laws to the distribution and consumption of marijuana and for other purposes, calls for the deregulation of marijuana, prohibits interstate shipping of marijuana. Basically, this is the one that takes marijuana out of the Controlled Substances Act and suggests that it should be treated like alcohol or tobacco, perhaps melded into the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. All right, when we come back, we begin the 900th episode, Retro Spectacular, clips and highlights, and the history of how I ended up here talking to you.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
You know Herb Thrasher from the Herb Thrasher Flower Hour. Now get ready for Herb Age Designs for the proud cannabis consumer. Herb Age Designs, lifestyle gear for the 420 friendly. Herb Age Designs. We've got Frisbee golf discs and durable hemp gear. Herb Age Designs. We've got shot glasses, drinking glasses, coffee mugs, and beer cozies. Check us out on Facebook and online at herbagedesigns.com. And follow Herb Age and Herb Thrasher on Twitter.
This is the Russ Belville Show, annoying Kevin Sabet since 2012.
NORMAL stands for Responsible Adult Cannabis Use. If cannabis use is causing problems in your life, consider taking a break or seeking medical assistance. Consider ceasing cannabis use if you have a family history of mental illness. Don't drive or operate heavy machinery while impaired by cannabis use. Cannabis use is not without risks, even though the risks are far less than those posed by legal drugs.
Activism begins with ACT. The Russ Belville Show features the stories of hardworking grassroots activists working for an end to prohibition in today's activist agenda.
Yes. Today in the activist agenda, I'm going to be real selfish, as if I'm not usually, but I'm going to be incredibly selfish for today's show because I'm celebrating. This is my 900th episode of the Russ Belville Show. 900. And this is the second time I've had 900 episodes of the Russ Belville Show, or at least a show that I do regularly. We're going to go back into the archives and take a look at the history of my talking into a microphone at people, at least not on stage playing bass in a bar, but as a talk radio host. And it's something that I never, ever imagined or intended in my life. It was a complete accident. I had no idea that this would be where I would be almost, I guess 11 years later. And let's go all the way back now to 2006. And if you can remember 2006, we had like 8 medical marijuana states. The Gallup polls were sitting at like 36% for legalization. And over at the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, or NORML, my good friend Chris Goldstein was getting involved with a brand new technology, a fairly new technology. He was a radio professional, is a radio professional, had been for a long time, was just getting involved with this new technology called podcasting. The idea that you could record a radio show and people on the internet could download it onto their devices and listen to it later. So back in the day, long before most people had any idea what a podcast was, Chris Goldstein began what was called the NORML Daily Audio Stash on June 13th, 2006.
Produced and distributed by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C. This is your daily audio stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Welcome back to NORML's Daily Audio Stash. I'm your host, Chris Goldstein. We've assembled a spectacular audio magazine again for you today. Take a moment to join us at NORML. Visit norml.org.
Yeah, podcast was known as an audio magazine back in the day. That's summer of 2006 when Chris Goldstein started the NORML Daily Audio Stash. Now, at that time, I had just begun my activism. In 2005, I had joined Oregon NORML, and I quickly rose to become second in command there, the associate director. I was in charge of the website, communications, and was a co-host of the television program, Oregon NORML Presents. But this was all local. This was all still in Portland at the local level. I had no involvement with National NORML at this time. So Chris had started Daily Audio Stash in the summer of 2006. As we forward through 2006, it's the middle of the second term of George W. Bush. Rush Limbaugh, Glenn Beck, Sean Hannity are riding high on the conservative AM talk radio airwaves, and there had begun this fledgling liberal talk radio network called Air America. You may remember it. And there were others like the Jones Radio Network that are also providing liberal talk. The problem liberal talk had was it had no superstars. It had no breakout stars like a Rush Limbaugh or a Glenn Beck. Now, unfortunately, that has a lot to do with the way we consume media, but I won't get into a big inside baseball thing on that. But to try to alleviate the dearth of liberal talkers, the Jones Radio Network got together with others, including the Bill Press Show, which is the number one liberal talk drive time show in Washington, D.C. They got together and formed this contest called the Search for the Next Great Progressive Talk Radio Star. And it was broadcast, and the contest was to be held in the fall of 2006. So while Chris Goldstein is running the Daily Audio Stash, I'm just working and living and acting with Oregon Normal. And my wife at the time, when I used to be married, heard this ad on AM 620 KPOJ. Now, that was a AM talk radio station here in Portland that was allied with Air America and actually had the greatest ratings of any liberal talk station in the nation at the time. Portland is kind of a liberal republic. So AM 620 KPOJ played this ad that was the ad for the Search for the Next Great Progressive Talk Radio Star, this contest, this star search, talent search for a liberal talk radio host. My wife heard that ad and she insisted that I enter. I resisted. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. What do I know about radio? What do I know about politics? I've never done radio before. It's not what I'm doing. I'm in information technology. I'm a computer guy. I'm a pot activist. Why would I be a political talk radio host? Who would ever hire me? What would I ever do? All right. So I resisted, but she, nevertheless, she persisted. And finally, on the day before the deadline to turn in the audition, I went to the studios, the Metro East Community TV, where we were filming the Oregon Normal show. And I went to the studios and I put together, you had to submit a 2-minute MP3 clip of something, of how you would do a talk radio show. So I put together this thing, and I apologize because I searched for the clip. I just can't find it on my hard drive anywhere. I may have to go back to the internet and search for it. But I put together this clip of Bill O'Reilly complaining about the war on Christmas. And I put in a bunch of machine gun sounds and screams and bomb blasts. And then I went into it. You know what I do. I went into my rant mode about how stupid this war on Christmas thing was. And I turned that in. Last day, that it could possibly be turned in, kind of did it half-ass just to get my wife off my back. Well, the long story short of that is I won. I was the winner for Portland. And this was judged by Tom Hartman. He's a talk radio pro. You may have heard of him. Others in the business here in Portland. So I was the entry from Portland, and there were 22 other stations around the country that also had entries. New York, Philly, Cleveland, etc. That also had entries, and one at-large entry from the internet. So there were 24 contestants, basically, selected from around the country. Of those 24, their 2-minute clips were put together and selected by a group of judges to pick the top 8. And I made the top 8. And what was special about the top 8 is that put me on the Bill Press Show, the number one show in Washington, D.C., because Bill Press's show on Saturday morning, was holding the live episodes of the contest. And the way it worked is each one of us contestants around the country would be at a local station patched into the Bill Press Show, and we would do one segment. So for, that's one segment each, 12 minutes a segment, 4 in the first hour, 4 in the second hour, right? So what this meant for me is, since Bill Press is on at 6 a.m. Eastern time, I was over at AM 620 KPOJ at 2 in the morning so I could be ready for the 3 a.m. call to get online, and then do my segment at like 4:15 a.m. or something like that. So they put us all 8 head-to-head live on the airwaves on Bill Press's with Bill Press's audience, basically. And they picked the top 4. Well, I made the top 4. So they did the same thing the next week, except we each got 2 segments. And I made the top 2. I won that round as well. So that left us, myself and a guy named Curtis from Denver, as the 2 finalists out of over 500 entrants from around the country. And they flew the 2 of us to Washington, D.C., and we were at the Center for American Progress. I actually met John Podesta. So when all that email stuff came out about John Podesta getting hacked, I kind of went, yeah, that figures he'd fall for a phishing scheme. Anyway, went for Center for American Progress. It was on C-SPAN 4, C-SPAN 8, whatever. Probably C-SPAN 3. There's an audience, a live audience of like 300 people there. And Curtis and I both did 3 full segments. We each got a whole hour of the Bill Press show, live on the air and live on C-SPAN and live studio audience. And in the next hour, in hour 2, I'm actually going to play you my second segment from the finals, because in that second segment, I did a rant on the war on drugs, and I was warned not to. As soon as they found out who I was and I was involved in Oregon Normal and marijuana activism, they told me, don't talk about the 4 Gs: God, gays, guns, and grass. So the professionals were telling me not to get involved with that. So I said, I can't do this finals and not speak out about the war on drugs. And I did. I took the risk and decided I was going to speak out about the war on drugs. And it actually turned out pretty good.
We'll start with the judges now. I wish we had a drum roll. And just go right down the list. And there we are. Ask for a drum roll. Is it radio magic? Ask for a drum roll and you get it. We'll go Bill Hess, Melody, right down the list. Your vote and maybe a quick word why.
Incredibly difficult decision. I'm going to go with Curtis Hannum. I felt it was a better, more cohesive hour that developed.
Emily?
I went with Russ. I think both were incredibly talented, but I think that Russ had an ability to really be provocative and funny and provide a lot of information.
Paul Woodhull.
I thought there was going to be a clear winner in this competition today, and there wasn't. So it was a really difficult decision, and I guess I really had to make my decision based on potential, and I went with Russ.
Okay, and Jessica, sure.
Yeah, I really thought it'd be clearer and easier today too, and it's been a real struggle because I think both of them are really talented and show great potential. But for me, I think that Curtis will be the guy I can work with.
Oh, man. Oh, all right. Here we go. The tiebreaker.
It's on you, Ed.
The pressure.
All on you, man.
It's only money and food in their families' mouths.
Future Progressive Radio.
In the interest of time, Ed Schultz, gotta go.
Is this a setup? Okay.
All right.
I'm not having any fun right now, okay?
Ed Schultz, cast your vote. 30 seconds.
I thought that Woody made a very interesting comment, and I wrote that word down here. Neither one of these guys are talk show hosts, and we're judging on potential and what we heard today. And I think for skills and moving forward and looking to the future about a radio talent, I would have to go with Russ Belville.
All right, it's Russ Belville, folks. America's next progressive talk radio star. Congratulations, guys. Congratulations. Great job. And look for their show coming up on the weekends. Who knows? Anytime. I'm Bill Press. Thanks for being here.
So that was the moment when Bill Press announced me as the winner of the next great progressive talk radio star, with Big Ed Schultz being the deciding judge in that. When we come back from break, I've got a couple of clips from that XM show that I used to do back in the Bush era, and then we'll take a look back at the Normal Daily Audio Stash, Normal Show Live, and the Russ Belville Show. The complete history, you and me, baby. 10 years on the radio. I can't believe it. We'll be right back.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
At Herbie's Cannabis Seeds, we pride ourselves on bringing you the best quality seeds from the world's most respected cannabis seed producers, all at the lowest online prices. You can find Herbie's Seeds at herbiesheadshop.com All cannabis seeds are sold as souvenirs and as a means of preserving cannabis genetics. Herbie Seeds in no way intends to condone, promote, or incite the use of illegal or controlled substances. We strongly urge all prospective customers to check their national laws prior to placing an order. Herbie Seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. Proud sponsors of the Russ Belville Show and 420 Radio.
You're not high. You're listening to the Russ Belville Show.
If you're 40 years old, you live in a log cabin in Oregon, you got 12 giant pot plants in your backyard, have a ball.
All right, maybe you're high, too. Good for you.
This is Radical Russ Belville with a word about stone driving. Numerous studies have shown that once you factor in age and gender, drivers with cannabis in their system have no statistically greater risk of motor vehicle crashes than sober drivers. But that doesn't mean you ought to be toking and driving. Those studies are referring to people with any amount of THC or metabolite in their system, not people who've just smoked marijuana. Simulators and observed demonstrations show that cannabis consumers do develop a tolerance to the impairing effects of marijuana and can perform driving tasks within an acceptable margin of safety. However, infrequent and novice consumers do not and cannot, and would be wise to never toke and drive. Even regular cannabis consumers should exercise caution before deciding to drive, as most state laws punish drivers harshly if they're discovered to have marijuana in their system. This has been a public service announcement from the Russ Belville Show.
Total war against public enemy number one.
10 federal criminal penalties for up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
Marijuana is probably the most dangerous drug.
Just say no. Legalization is just another word for surrender.
I experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
This is not medicine. This is a Cheech and Chong show.
Encourage people to use less drugs.
I inhale.
That was the point.
I think it would be a mistake to legalize.
Negative reports coming out of Colorado.
Good people don't smoke marijuana.
Radical Rant. Welcome back, everybody. For this Radical Rant, we're continuing my 900th episode retro spectacular, and we got to the point where I finally started radio. I won the search for the next great progressive talk radio star contest, the national contest in 2006, to find a liberal talk radio host to become a big star. Now, that did not happen. We soon found out that liberal talk radio, nothing like conservative talk radio, and there was no breakout star future for me in that. But I did enjoy it. I got a lot of experience working on a weekly radio show, producing it by myself, writing it by myself, engineering it with the help of a remote engineer in Washington, D.C. named Stevie Lee Webb, a transplant from London. Great guy. And did 89 episodes of that show that ran from April of 2007 through January of 2009. So I got the last 2 years of George W. Bush and the first couple of weeks just before Barack Obama would be inaugurated. Here is now, unfortunately, I have lost the first 2 episodes. I don't know where my first 2 episodes are, if they ever got recorded. So here's a clip from episode number 3, my third show ever on the radio on XM satellite at AM 620 KPOJ.
This is the Russ Belville Show, the winner of America's search for the next great progressive talk radio star. Now, here's your host, Radical Russ Belville.
Oh, yeah, bienvenidos a los Russ Belville Show. I'm Radical Russ. It's Cinco de Mayo, and welcome to the weekend. Glad to have you all here. I'm your Red State refugee, and just reminding you, we may not be politically correct here at the Russ Belville Show, but we are correct politically. The United States Sentencing Commission last Friday came out with with a report where they want to lighten up on the first-time offenders that are caught with crack cocaine. Now, the current mandatory minimum for getting caught with 5 grams of crack cocaine is 63 to 78 months, so 5 or 6 years for a first-time offender caught with 5 grams of crack cocaine. Okay, so how does this fit into the whole racism issue? Well, here's the deal. Crack cocaine has a 5-year automatic sentence. To get that same kind of sentence, the equivalent sentence of 5 grams of crack, you have to be caught with 500 grams of powder cocaine. Okay? So get that. Crack cocaine, 5 grams, get you 5 years. Powder cocaine, half a kilo, gets you 5 years. So why is that a stat about racism? Well, who is using the crack cocaine? Poor, urban, minority clientele. Who's using the powder cocaine? Rich white folks. That's the deal, folks. That's why we have this institutionalized racism.
So even from the beginning, while I was there on XM Satellite and 620 KPOJ, I was bringing up the drug war in show after show at a time when not a lot of people were talking about that. And I'm really proud that I was able to do that. Here's a quick listen to my last show, or one of my last shows. I think I did another show after this. I think this isn't quite all of the shows, but this is show number 89 from XM Satellite, January of 2009.
We see another. Let me give you just another statistic here. This one, speaking of Bristol Palin, they just came out with the Centers for Disease Control came out with the report on the highest teen pregnancy rates, and they found that teen pregnancy has gone up across the board, all across America. Teen pregnancy has gone up during the same time the Bush administration is pushing the abstinence-only sex ed, saying to kids, just say no to sex because it works so well with drugs. Just say no. So try and guess what the number one state is for the highest teen pregnancy rates. Let me narrow it down for you. Try and guess whether it's a blue state or a red state. Yeah, a little bit easier to figure out.
So continuing on with comparisons as well to the drug war, the just say no in drugs not working, the just say no with abstinence-only sex education. So I did as much as I could on XM Satellite try to weave in drug war narratives and ideas into the discussion, and I was really proud to be able to do that. Now, in between those two clips, in 2008, Chris Goldstein was still running the Normal Daily Audio Stash when he was getting divorced, and it was becoming an issue in the divorce proceedings with respect to child custody. So he had to abruptly cease his marijuana activism activities, including recording the Normal Daily Audio Stash. Up to this point, I had begun going to the Normal national conferences, 2006 and 2007, so I was starting to meet some of these people, and I had met Chris Goldstein and knew of him doing the podcast. And when he had to leave, Normal asked him if he knew of anybody who had radio experience who knew a lot about marijuana policy. And he suggested me because I was on XM Satellite at the time. So from February 11th of 2008, I began recording the Normal Daily Audio Stash podcast while I was still on XM Satellite on Saturdays. So I would do Monday through Friday podcast, and then I would do my Saturday live show on XM Satellite. Here is a listen to my very first episode of Normal's podcast.
It's Monday, February 11th at 4:20 p.m., and I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville. Thank you for having me here on the Normal Daily Audio Stash. This is my first stash as the new official host, so glad to be here, and thanks to everyone at the National Board of Normal for inviting me to be the voice of the best drug reform organization on the planet.
So that was first intro, and on the very next show, show number 2, the first time I ever talked to this gentleman.
The latest headline I saw was something about marijuana causing your teeth to fall out. What's the story behind that?
It's a shame, Russ, because we're seeing headlines like marijuana rots your gums. And there is a big study coming out of New Zealand where a whole bunch of people were followed up over the years and asked about their cannabis use and some of their gum disease. But I'm afraid the headlines have made...
So that was my first interview with Dr. Mitch Earlywine for our Cannabis Q&A. That was February 12th, 2008. So I've literally been talking to Dr. Mitch almost every week since for 9 years now. So, yeah, we've discussed almost everything you can talk about with marijuana. Now, another change that I implemented in taking over the Daily Audio Stash is the inclusion of more music and comedy, even sometimes when I would try to make my little lame attempts at comedy. This is my April Fool's Day episode from 2008.
Now it's time to take a look at the latest stories about marijuana from news organizations across America and around the world in our Normal Daily Audio Stash, Hemp Headlines.
President George W. Bush announces amnesty for all marijuana prisoners, by Samuel R. Caldwell, special federal correspondent. In a surprise move today while visiting Kiev, Ukraine, in advance of NATO meetings, U.S. President George Bush made a dramatic announcement that in one giant sweeping act of executive clemency, he was freeing all 70,000 of America's marijuana-only prisoners. President Bush said, quote,
I was down in Crawford last week, driving my pickup around the ranch, looking for some brush to cut. Turned on the radio. It was my buddy, my fellow Texan, Willie Nelson. He was singing Bobby McGee. Well, right after that song finished, Willie came back on and did a PSA. That's a public service announcement for NORML. You know that marijuana group. I was sitting there in my truck alone, listening, and guess what? A thought occurred to me. You know, I'm at the end of my term in office, and I'm never going to be running to be elected for anything ever again. That's when I realized that freedom isn't just another word when you ain't free. And I have the power to free America's most harmless prisoners, the 70,000 marijuana-only prisoners.
End quote. So my April Fool's joke, some folks liked it. Some folks weren't too happy about it. Now, speaking of the characters and segments on the show, we've pointed out the first Dr. Mitch, the first comedy bit that I put together. This clip from December of 2008, I believe, marks one of the first times we heard from our old-timey 1920s radio reporter, even though we didn't hear very much from him.
And the number one stupid stoner story of 2008.
Miss Teen Louisiana loses crown over pot.
Now this entry takes the number one not just for the stupidity of the actions, but the high profile of the stupidity. The blonde beauty queen is already a stereotype for dumb, but this young woman made the list by skipping out on a $46 lunch tab with 3 friends. She left behind her purse, which contained some cannabis, and when she returned to retrieve it, the police were waiting to arrest her for cannabis and for the dine and dash.
So, yeah, there we go. That was old-timey 1920s radio reporter Freddie Farrak, but just announcing the headlines, not telling the whole story. Of course, that expanded as time went on. And then, speaking of first, this clip from 2009, December of 2009, marks the first time I ever spoke to a former law enforcement professional with Law Enforcement Against Prohibition.
It's time now to speak to one such officer in our continuing look at Law Enforcement Against Prohibition.
We're inaugurating a new segment here at the NORML Daily Audio Stash where we get the chance to speak to members of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Check them out at copssaylegalizdrugs.com or leap.cc. Our first guest is Jim Gierach, who is a former Cook County prosecutor and member of LEAP. And Jim, welcome to the show.
Russ, it's good to be with you.
At what point did you start to see the futility of it? Was it something you'd always thought, or did it take time for you to develop this view?
Well, actually, in the early 70s, I was a gung-ho prosecutor and was in favor of prosecuting all drug crimes vigorously. And actually was to the point where I was to the extreme of harshness on drug prosecution, which was an aberration back at the time because people didn't think it was that big a deal. Mm-hmm. And of course my views changed after I saw that the harder you impress prohibition, the worse the problems, including the drug problem, become.
Of course, we continued the segment with the former law enforcement officers now expanding their mission as Law Enforcement Action Partnership. Well, that sound means that's all the time we got for Hour 1 for those of you listening on the free podcast. Those of you listening live, watching live on RadicalRuss.com, stay tuned for Hour 2, Toker Talk Radio. We've got more clips from the history of the Russ Belville Show and our 900th episode, including the complete second segment from the Progressive Talk Radio Star Contest, where I wowed Ed Schultz with my knowledge of drug war politics. For everyone here at Delta 9 Studios in beautiful legal Portland, Oregon, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow